Hello, everyone. Welcome to the 30th talk in our NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar series. The goal of these NOAA-wide seminars is to showcase examples of NOAA's leadership and impact in environmental science by those who lead it and make it happen. My name is Ali Kristan, and I am a 2022 Sea Grant John Knaus Marine Policy Fellow working in the Office of Polar Programs in the U.S. National Science Foundation. Dr. Knaus was a founding father of the National Sea Grant College program and a former NOAA administrator. I'll be serving as your MC today. And I'd like to take a moment for a few acknowledgements and webinar details. First, I'd like to thank the NOAA Science Council and the team that puts together these seminars, without whom none of this would happen. We have Hernan Garcia with NOAA NESDIS National Centers for Environmental Information, Sandra Clare with NOAA NESDIS Office of the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer, Katie Rowley with NOAA OAR and the NOAA Central Library, and also Robert Levy, the NOAA Studio Production Manager. We'd also like to thank our captioner, Sabrina Crosby, for making this webinar more accessible. We often have staffers assist us for the NOAA leadership seminars during the Q&A, and today we have Grace Groover moderating the questions and answers. Second, I'd like to share some seminar logistics. All attendees are muted and questions will be addressed at the end of the webinar. So please type all of your questions and comments into the Q&A box at any time during the webinar, and we'll address as many as we can at the end. We're also recording this seminar if you want to watch it later. Now, today's NOAA Leadership Seminar is titled NOAA's Role in the Whole of Government Effort to Address the Climate Crisis, and our speaker today is Dr. Wayne Higgins. Dr. Wayne Higgins is currently the director of the Climate Program Office with NOAA's Office of Oceanic and Atmospheric Research. He serves as the focal point for climate programs within NOAA, supporting one of NOAA's primary mission goals, which is to understand climate variability and change to enhance society's ability to plan and respond. Dr. Higgins' research interests span climate variability and change, as well as weather-climate linkages to improve climate prediction. He has published more than 80 scientific peer-reviewed scientific journals, 5 book chapters, 32 atlases and technical reports, and 165 conference proceedings. He has and continues to serve in many U.S. and international advisory and leading roles. For example, he currently serves as the chair to the U.S. Global Change Research Program, the U.S. principal to the Global Framework for Climate Services of the World Meteorological Organization, and was elected as a fellow of the American Meteorological Society. Dr. Higgins received his Ph.D. in meteorology from Pennsylvania State University. And with all of that said, a warm welcome to Dr. Higgins. Thank you so much for being here. We can't wait to hear about how NOAA's work can help address climate change impacts. And the mic is all yours.
Well, thank you so much, Ali, for that warm introduction. As Ali said, yes, I'm Wayne Higgins, director of NOAA's Climate Program Office, and it's really a great pleasure to be with you today and to talk about NOAA's role in this whole of government effort to address the climate crisis. Now, before I start my presentation, I do want to give you kind of a high-level overview of how I'm going to be covering my time with you today. And since this is an environmental leadership seminar, I thought I'd begin with just a little bit about myself, what drives and inspires me, and a few things that I've done in my career to kind of aspire to be an environmental leader. The majority of my time, however, with you will focus on NOAA's role and work, in particular, to provide authoritative climate products and services. And I'll highlight why authoritative climate products and services are absolutely essential for tackling the climate crisis. I'll also discuss some of the current administration's climate priorities, and I'll emphasize for you how NOAA actions are reflecting and responding to those priorities. I'll provide a brief overview of the international climate landscape and NOAA's role on the world stage. And then finally, I look forward to hearing from you and answering your questions. Now, before we get started, I do want to say that I'm really honored to be a part of the NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar series. I know this is a great way to share priorities and insights with a broad audience, and so I really do appreciate this opportunity. If we could go to the next slide, please. So since this is an environmental leadership seminar, as I mentioned, I wanted to start off by just sharing a bit of information about me and what motivated and inspired my career. For my entire life, I've always known and loved the physical world around me. I was most fascinated, I would say, by changes in the day-to-day weather as a child, from the meandering cumulus clouds in the summer sky to the heavy snowstorms of the Midwestern winter. And I grew up in the Chicago suburbs of Illinois, and it's no stretch to say, but by the time I entered kindergarten, I knew I wanted to be a meteorologist and that someday I hoped to work in the National Weather Service. Now, I grew up, as I mentioned, in the Chicago suburbs, and this was in the 1960s, back at a time when my childhood inspiration was really the on-air Chicago area weather forecasters. And in fact, I had watching the on-air daily weather forecasts down to a bit of a science. There were only 5 on-air stations back in the 1960s, and I had it timed so that I could basically tune into each one, or at least portions of each one each day. Kind of a primitive ensemble forecasting approach, I think. And the top row of the slide actually shows 3 of my favorites from my childhood. My oldest memories actually are of P.J. Hoff. He was an on-air forecaster during the 1960s, and he illustrated all of his forecasts by hand, and he used cartoon drawings of Windy City characters. He's actually showing here the vice president in charge of looking out the window, but there were a whole suite of characters that he had. Harry Volkman in the center was another forecaster I followed during the 1960s and early 1970s. He communicated passionately about his love of the weather, and he inspired really a sense of wonder in me. And he connected with literally thousands of Chicago area youth, many of whom went on into meteorology and related environmental fields. And the third is John Coleman, the father of the Weather Channel and a Chicago area forecaster from 68 to 79. He probably had the greatest influence on me. He coined many new terms. One I remember in particular was the boonies for the Chicago suburbs. One of the highlights of my childhood, I have to say, was receiving a hand-drawn weather map that he used on the air, that he signed, and that he sent to me, and I still have it to this day. Although I was inherently motivated to study meteorology, I came from a very blue-collar family that had not traditionally pursued higher education. And so direction actually came from my teachers. In particular, one of my science teachers at Homewood Flossmoor High School in Illinois, whose name was Mrs. Berman, tailored her environmental science course for me to focus on meteorology. And she also took liberty to put me in touch with folks at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana who welcomed me into the field. So after I pursued an undergraduate degree in physics at Illinois, and I did this because they didn't at the time have an undergraduate degree in meteorology, I then went on to the Pennsylvania State University for master's and doctoral degrees in meteorology. And while I was at Penn State, I started to pursue my broader interests in climate research and linkages between weather and climate. And I was really inspired there, in particular by Professor John Dutton. He was my master's thesis advisor and a great friend who opened my eyes to the elegance of atmospheric dynamics, as well as to the importance of atmospheric modeling and prediction. After graduation with a Ph.D., I spent almost 7 years at NASA's Goddard Space Flight Center, where I worked on global climate models. And then in 1994, I made the transition to NOAA, and I've never looked back. Since then, during my career at NOAA, I've been inspired by so many outstanding and committed NOAA colleagues, many scientists, administrative assistants, budget analysts, senior executives, just to name a few. And it really would take the rest of my time in this hour to describe them all to you, but I do want to tune to 2 notable standouts who I'll describe one by one. First, Louis Uccellini, who just retired in December of 2021 from his role as the Assistant Administrator of NOAA's National Weather Service. Louis gave me opportunities to lead in the operational services arena, including as director of the Climate Prediction Center. I worked for Louis for almost 20 years, and he even gave me an opportunity to serve as acting director of the National Centers for Environmental Prediction. I have to say, there is no greater champion of today's National Weather Service, and I felt his passion to my core and still do. He had a drive to advance a weather-ready nation with impact-based decision support services, and these are services that directly influence decisions to save lives and property. And that had a profound effect on my understanding of the importance of customer service and service delivery for weather and climate. His example and his leadership epitomize, in my view, why I love working at NOAA. Another standout for me is Craig McLean, who also just retired in April of 2022 from his role as Assistant Administrator of NOAA Research. Craig taught me more than anyone about scientific integrity, science policy, and also how to navigate and make hard decisions. I often think in my job about what Craig would have done when I'm confronted with difficult decisions. Craig also encouraged me and encouraged many of us to listen to everyone, encourage innovation, and think outside the box. As a New Jersey native, Craig would always say, "I'm wearing your jersey." And consequently, I felt a sense of trust and motivation to be a better leader, to live up to his example. To this day, I'm continually inspired by the dedication and esprit de corps of my NOAA colleagues. Their dedication to NOAA's science and services mission is breathtaking and what inspires me to do my best. And in my federal career, which has actually been quite long now, I have also learned that how I interact with people matters, and it matters the most. Putting the needs of colleagues and stakeholders up front and thinking about public service from their perspective, specifically what they need and how I can help meet their needs, is the key to mission success. And I encourage all of you to prioritize how you interact with people and whatever inspires you. Next slide, please. So the inspiration from my NOAA colleagues and the experience I've gained as a career NOAA employee give me, I think, a unique perspective from which to discuss NOAA's intra-agency, interagency, and international activities. To give you a sense, I thought I'd show you my current roles, several of which Allie mentioned in her opening introduction. But I wanted to show you how I think they give me a unique view for helping to achieve the NOAA climate mission. So you can see that currently in the Executive Office of the President, I serve as the chair of the U.S. Global Change Research Program's Subcommittee on Global Change Research, and we'll come back to this and talk more about it in a bit. I also serve as co-chair of the Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services Subcommittee on Climate Services, and again, we'll come back and talk about this as well. At the Department of Commerce, I'm now serving as the accountability lead for the Department of Commerce's climate risk area, and we'll come back to this. And then at NOAA, at the NOAA level, in addition to being director of NOAA's Climate Program Office, I'm also serving as OAR's Climate Portfolio Steward and as chair of the NOAA Climate Team. So I get a kind of perspective from the office level, the line office level, and also the NOAA level within NOAA. So thank you. Next slide, please. So let me turn to what you came to hear about today, which is NOAA's role in the whole of government effort to address the climate crisis. And in the talk, what I'd like to do is highlight NOAA's work to provide authoritative climate products and services. I'll also discuss some of the current administration's climate priorities and emphasize how NOAA actions are reflecting and responding to those priorities to help contextualize the work that we've been doing at NOAA. Next slide, please. So in 2021 alone, extreme weather and climate events upended the US economy and affected nearly 1 in 3 Americans. This included hurricanes, drought, heat, fires, floods, and even at particular locations, heat followed by fires, followed by floods. So due to all of this, international and domestic supply chains were disrupted, affecting critical industries, including housing and construction and semiconductors and agriculture, and caused other delays and shortages both for consumers and businesses. So clearly, with climate change, people are increasingly in harm's way. So by addressing the climate crisis head on, the federal government will safeguard Americans and ensure the long-term sustainability of U.S. economic prosperity. So from the President's office, across the various federal agencies, at the Department of Commerce, and here at NOAA, we're committed to delivering climate products and services that produce results. And we're also taking actions and working with governments around the world to ensure international results and impacts. So the figure on this slide shows some of the key high-level activities that are taking place at the Executive Office of the President in the upper left of the figure, at the Department of Commerce and NOAA in the upper right portion of the figure, and internationally along the bottom. And what I'd like to do is walk you through some of these activities with an emphasis on how NOAA is accelerating the whole of government effort to address the climate crisis. I do want to highlight that this is only the tip of the iceberg, if you will, but I think walking through these activities together will give you an appreciation for the whole of government approach to addressing this crisis. Next slide, please. So let's start with NOAA. NOAA is clearly a unique federal investment in integrated climate capabilities, driven by state-of-the-art research using essential global observations. By drawing on this foundation, NOAA delivers the authoritative climate products and services the nation needs. Next slide, please. Our NOAA administrator, Dr. Rick Spinrad, has been very forward-leaning about positioning NOAA as the authoritative federal source of climate products and services for our nation. He says, and I'm quoting here, "This can't just be a claim we make. It must be something our constituents see with overwhelming evidence." And I love this. He describes this as NOAA's bricks in the wall. And since its inception, it's fair to say that NOAA has been building a foundational climate service so that there are already many NOAA bricks in the wall. Some of the recent examples that Dr. Spinrad has used include when White House National Climate Advisor Gina McCarthy called on NOAA to participate actively in the United Nations Climate Change Conference called COP26, and we'll talk more about the COPs a bit later on. When members of NOAA were appointed to co-chair 2 interagency working groups for the White House's National Climate Task Force, another brick in the wall. When Department of Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said that she will look to NOAA to represent Department of Commerce on climate issues, another brick in the wall. As another brick in the wall, NOAA established a climate council in July of 2021, and it's currently developing a vision and plan for a climate-ready nation, and in particular, envisions a thriving nation whose prosperity, health, security, and continued growth benefit from and depend upon a shared understanding and collective action to reduce the impacts of climate change. Next slide, please. So as I introduced on the previous slide, NOAA has been putting bricks in the wall since 1970 when it was created. And this is partly in recognition, of course, to the fact that the ocean and the atmosphere, and of course, other components of the Earth system are interconnected and must be treated and studied as an integrated system. Since that time, of course, NOAA has built a strong foundational climate service, and it is driven by state-of-the-art research, global climate models, and climate predictions, all using the essential global observations. The blue bar on this slide outlines the various types of NOAA climate products and services. Federal agencies, state, local, and tribal governments, businesses, and citizens turn to NOAA every day for information, whether it's about a phenomena on land or at sea, in the atmosphere, or beyond. And we will continue, of course, to align NOAA's foundational capabilities shown along the bottom of the slide. From our observations, our research and development, our modeling and predictions, and our service delivery and decision support services. One thing I think that sets NOAA apart, perhaps from other agencies, is our clear focus on execution. NOAA is focused on rapid advances in science and technology and continued improvement of its delivery of services to ensure that the nation receives what it needs to understand and respond to the climate crisis. Next slide. So today, all NOAA line offices deliver authoritative climate products and services. Here I'm showing just a select few really, of those from across all of NOAA's line offices. NOAA is working hand in hand with state and local governments, tribes, academia, and businesses to improve these products and services and to make sure that they're meeting the needs of our stakeholders. Every day we provide this critical information for the public and decision makers, and it is saving lives, advancing livelihoods and lifestyles. And this is in particular from the impacts of extreme weather, water, and climate events. Next slide, please. NOAA's priorities have been consistent since Dr. Spinrad was confirmed as NOAA's administrator. And in particular, next month, NOAA will roll out a new strategic plan. And it includes 3 priority goals that are aimed at: first, building a climate-ready nation by developing, delivering, and using climate products and services. Second, making sure that equity is central to NOAA's mission. And third, by fostering an information-based blue economy. Next slide, please. An initial action that Dr. Spinrad took as NOAA administrator was to establish the NOAA Climate Council that I mentioned earlier. And there the idea is to enhance our delivery of climate science and services. Now, this NOAA Climate Council provides high-level guidance and determines strategic priorities on climate, weather, and water issues. But Dr. Spinrad also knew that NOAA already had a weather, water, and climate board in place, with a focus on integrating cross-line office planning, implementation, and evaluation of weather, water, and climate activities. So in short, if you will, the Weather, Water, and Climate Board is where some of the decisions made at the NOAA Climate Council are carried out. So recently, the board completed a weather, water, and climate strategy, the front cover of which is shown on this slide on the left-hand side. This strategy aligns with the new NOAA strategic plan, and hence it will be used to guide annual and out-year planning as substantive steps towards climate-ready nation. The Weather, Water, and Climate Strategy includes outcomes associated with 6 societal challenge areas, which are shown on the right-hand side of this figure. And these are areas in which NOAA is very well positioned to work with its partners to address. Next slide, please. Brick by brick, the board is helping to establish NOAA as the authoritative source of climate products and services for our nation. And to ensure that it is responding to what users need, the board has endorsed several cross-cutting activities that are substantive steps towards building a climate-ready nation. And these include the Climate and Fisheries Initiative, which will address increasing requirements that we have for climate information to fulfill the National Marine Fisheries Service's mandates for fisheries management and protected species conservation. The Precipitation Prediction Grand Challenge, which will provide NOAA and its partners more accurate, reliable, and timely precipitation forecasts across timescales, from weather to seasonal to decadal scales. And this will be through the development and application of a fully coupled Earth system prediction model. The Coastal Inundation at Climate Timescales White Paper, which envisions a NOAA national capability to provide data, products, and services on monthly to centennial coastal flooding and inundation risk for the U.S. and its territories. The board has also been working to address the challenge of enhancing our delivery of climate products and services. And I want to particularly focus on the service delivery framework, which was endorsed by the board in November of 2020. It's NOAA's approach to guiding and improving decision support products and services and their delivery through sustained engagement and collaboration with users to ensure and to facilitate the integration of services into actionable information. Responding to user needs is a guiding principle at NOAA, and the agency is committed to continuous engagement with decision makers. We call this hand-in-hand process co-production, and it allows equity a priority for NOAA to remain at the center of decision-making. NOAA is committed to delivering the products and services that help keep all Americans safe and our economy strong. Next slide, please. NOAA's work to provide authoritative climate products and services is critical and is a critical contribution to the whole of government effort to address the climate crisis. Next slide, please. So amid the increasing extreme events across the country, as well as the scientific warnings that the world must slash its carbon emissions by the end of the decade, the Biden-Harris administration has made the federal government's response to climate change a major priority, and it has mobilized this whole of government approach that has made climate central to its economic agenda, and with a focus on improving the equitable provision of services in every community, and especially the traditionally underserved. Next slide, please. The current administration is quite committed to and is making significant investments in climate science and services. And that supports the whole of government effort to address the climate crisis. For NOAA specifically, the President's budget request for fiscal year 22 and the significant new investments that we saw in the final 2022 omnibus budget bill, I think demonstrate quite clearly the significant new investments in climate research, data, and tools that this administration supports. In NOAA's fiscal year 2023 budget requests, there are advances for Climate Ready Nation, for the new blue economy, and equity, including an additional $350 million to expand NOAA's role in providing authoritative climate products and services. In late 2021, Congress approved a disaster supplemental, which provided NOAA with $345 million to respond to damages from hurricanes and wildfires that occurred in calendar years 2020 and 2021, as well as to mitigate the impacts of future disasters. And in July of last year, the President announced the bipartisan infrastructure framework, which was signed into law in November of last year, and which provides almost $3 billion to NOAA over the next 5 fiscal years, with provisions to improve coastal and inundation flood and inundation mapping and forecasting, water modeling activities, modernize precipitation frequency and probable maximum precipitation studies, wildfire prediction, detection, observation, modeling, and forecasting, and also improved and enhanced coastal, ocean, and Great Lakes observing systems. Next slide, please. As one of his early actions, President Biden signed Executive Order 14008, which is focused on tackling the climate crisis at home and abroad. Now, Section 211D of this executive order called for 2 reports, both released by the White House this past October, and both that collectively move us towards a national framework for climate services. The first report, which was entitled Opportunities for Expanding and Improving Climate Information and Services for the Public, was co-developed by NOAA in coordination with the Office of Science and Technology Policy and FEMA. And this report charts a course for expanding accessibility and use of the federal government's climate information and services to support all communities. And by the way, the link to this report is on the slide here. The second report, entitled Advancing the Nation's Geospatial Capabilities to Promote Federal, State, Local, and Tribal Climate Planning and Resilience, focuses on the role the federal government plays in providing geospatial data and mapping tools, and the potential for a collaborative federal mapping service to make climate data more accessible. Next slide. This same executive order also formally established the White House Office of Domestic Climate Policy, creating a central office in the White House that's charged with coordinating and implementing the President's domestic climate agenda. This is the first ever climate policy office leading a national climate task force of more than 20 federal agencies, including NOAA. Now, the National Climate Task Force itself has assembled cabinet-level leaders from across the federal government to accelerate and further enable the whole of government approach to addressing the climate crisis. And here you can see the organization of the interagency working groups and other interagency resilience efforts under this National Climate Task Force. I'd like to just focus on one portion of this diagram, which is on the the left-hand side, where you can see 5 resilience interagency working groups. They are drought relief, flood resilience, coastal resilience, extreme heat, and wildfire resilience. I'm emphasizing these because these are 5 of the 6 societal challenges that I highlighted earlier when talking about the Weather, Water, and Climate Board's Weather, Water, and Climate Strategy. So clearly, NOAA has an important role to play here and is well connected through these climate hazards. NOAA actively participates in all of these interagency working groups, and in fact, NOAA co-chairs the Coastal Resilience and Extreme Heat working groups. And recently, a 6th interagency working group, which is in the bottom of this figure, focused on climate-smart infrastructure, has been formed to increase resilience to the impacts of climate change. Okay, next slide, please. Coordinated research and services are critical to addressing the climate crisis across the federal government. And here I'm highlighting 2 federal activities focused on coordination across many federal agencies to advance research through the U.S. Global Change Research Program and services through the Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services. I'd like to talk about each of these in turn. The U.S. Global Change Research Program is a confederation of 13 federal agencies that are mandated through the Global Change Research Act of 1990 to assist the nation and the world to understand, assess, predict, and respond to human-induced and natural processes of climate change and global change. The Department of Commerce, through NOAA and NIST, is one of 13 agencies that participates in USGCRP. So again, this program coordinates global change research, informs decisions, and delivers mandated products, some of which you may have heard of, such as the National Climate Assessment. It also produces an annual budget document called Our Changing Planet and works on things such as decadal strategic plans. USGCRP also supports international efforts, including U.S. participation in international assessments, such as those from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which I'll mention in a few moments, and several international secretariats, such as Future Earth, START, and the World Climate Research Program. Now, USGCRP's 5th National Climate Assessment will be delivered in late 2023, and the next USGCRP Decadal Strategic Plan for the period from 2022 to 2031 will be delivered in late 2022. So you can look for those products. The Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services, or ICAMS, is a historic, and I mean historic, restructuring of interagency coordination for the federal meteorological enterprise to advance services. And this is the first restructuring of the meteorological services since the 1960s. Accompanying the restructuring is a bold aspiration to lead the world in meteorological services via an Earth system approach, providing societal benefits with information that spans local weather to global climate. Now, ICAMS is co-chaired by the Director of the Office of Science and Technology Policy, Dr. Alondra Nelson, and the Undersecretary of Commerce for Oceans and Atmosphere, Dr. Rick Spinrad. The work of the ICAMS is organized under 4 primary committees that are listed on the slide here in the lower right. So through the work of USGCRP research and ICAMS services, the federal government is working to foster interagency coordination and collaboration to develop, deliver, and continually advance climate science and services consistent with the Biden-Harris whole of government effort to tackle the climate crisis. Next slide, please. Moving to the last section of my presentation, I really want to highlight international collaboration, which is the key to success. On day 1, President Biden fulfilled his promise to rejoin the Paris Agreement and set a course for the United States to tackle the climate crisis at home and abroad, reaching a net zero emissions economy-wide by no later than 2050. At the World Leaders Climate Summit in April of last year, President Biden announced that the United States will target reducing emissions by 50 to 52% by 2030 compared to 2005 levels. And I want to highlight here that while mitigation is a critical topic and NOAA's carbon research and tracking are essential, the administration has also increased emphasis on adaptation and resilience while continuing to push for greater ambition in emissions reductions. Next slide, please. The Conference of the Parties, or COP, is the United Nations annual climate change conference. And this conference has the goal of uniting the world to tackle climate change. The most recent conference was COP26. NOAA was heavily involved in all aspects of COP26, which included providing leadership to the US delegation, serving as the masters of ceremony for the US Center at the COP26, and also ensuring that negotiations were carried out in accordance with the best available science. Of course, one of our most important science lanes. At COP26, the president launched his emergency plan for adaptation and resilience called PREPARE. And NOAA is one of the 5 agencies called out in that plan that have a critical role to play in adaptation efforts. And in particular, NOAA will work to build capacity by sharing its global data, resources, and tools, as well as by providing direct technical assistance and capacity building to developing countries to empower them to better understand and respond to climate hazards. NOAA's engagement at the COPs is a long-standing one, from the first COP to the upcoming COP27 in Egypt later this year. In Egypt, NOAA, of course, will be present to continue advocating for the use of the best available science, for deepening our international partnerships, and for demonstrating bold US government ambitions to take on the climate crisis. Next slide, please. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change is the United Nations body for assessing the science related to climate change. It was created to provide policymakers with regular scientific assessments on climate change, its implications, and potential future risks, as well as to put forward adaptation and mitigation options. So this IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has completed all 3 volumes of its 6th assessment report, which is called AR6, and a synthesis report, which integrates the working group contributions and the special reports that have been produced in this 6th cycle, will be released in the fall. I think one high-level takeaway that I'd like to highlight for you from the recent IPCC reports is that, and I quote, "Adaptation is effective for protecting people, places, and nature, semicolon. However, adaptation efforts to date have been too fragmented and small scale to meet the challenges posed by a changing climate." Next slide, please. And finally, I want to briefly mention the World Climate Research Program, which is a critical climate program within the World Meteorological Organization. Rapid advances of new science and technology are key to addressing the climate crisis and meeting society's urgent needs for actionable climate information. And critically, the World Climate Research Program provides the scientific basis for the IPCC assessment reports. And the World Climate Research Program also provides the climate science that underpins the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, including national commitments under the Paris Agreement of 2015. Implementation of World Climate Research Program activities include a set of what are called lighthouse activities, shown on the right-hand side of this diagram. And these are designed to rapidly advance science and technologies, and also the institutional frameworks that are needed to manage climate risk and meet society's urgent needs for actionable climate information. Importantly, I want to highlight that the World Climate Research Program recently adopted the Global Precipitation Experiment, or GPEX, as a cross-World Climate Research Program international activity. I'm highlighting this because GPEX is a major component of NOAA's Precipitation Prediction Grand Challenge, which I mentioned earlier in the talk, as one of the key initiatives under the Weather, Water, and Climate Board. Now, GPEX has recently had the luxury of an international Tiger team being formed at the World Climate Research Program, and that is made up of members from some 10 countries who are in the process of working on getting GPEX adopted as one of the World Climate Research Program's handful of lighthouse activities. So I'm rooting for this because I see this as a key way to move the Precipitation Prediction Grand Challenge in a thoughtful way into the international community, because clearly to achieve the goals of that grand challenge, we need to align the research community, the observations community, and the applications and services communities around the needs for improving precipitation forecasts across timescales. So I think that's a great example of connectivity between NOAA and the World Climate Research Program within the WMO. So moving to my closing message. Next slide, please. So in this presentation, I've really just tried to contextualize much of the climate work that we're doing here at NOAA during the current administration. And I hope you leave with a bit of a better understanding of why this work is important to our nation and indeed to the world. NOAA is committed to building a climate-ready nation by 2030 and is supporting the whole of government effort to address the climate crisis and to promote economic development. And all of our work is done through a strong lens of equity impacting lives, livelihoods, and lifestyles. And let me say finally, I continue to be inspired by our organizational resilience here at NOAA to tackle the climate crisis, and I'm really honored to be a participant in this effort. Next slide, please. So I hope you found this information useful. There are a number of links on the slides that I didn't highlight that will take you for more information to the various reports that I mentioned through the talk. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today. And at this point, I welcome your comments and questions. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm Grace. I'll be reading out some questions slightly shortened for brevity. Our first question is, given the interdisciplinary nature of climate change issues, in what ways do you think the existing division of labor and scope of authority across various government entities might be reorganized or restructured to provide more timely and effective governance?
Well, I'll just begin by re-emphasizing that we have a historic restructuring of the meteorological services underway through the Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services. And at the same time, we have programs like the U.S. Global Change Research Program, which is a consortium of federal agencies, currently about 13 of them, to advance global change research. I think what we really need to work on is ways to effectively leverage and connect the research and services and put up front stakeholder needs across our key constituencies as we think about how to evolve these programs. So for example, with respect to USGCRP, we are trying to increase our ambition by taking on new areas of science, such as climate mitigation or urban issues. But before we go too far down that path, we certainly want to make sure we understand from the perspectives of, stakeholders, in, say, urban settings, what the key needs are for advances in research. So bottom line is, I think we are very well positioned through programs like the U.S. Global Change Research Program and like the Interagency Council for Advancing Meteorological Services to begin to think about that division of labor. We, of course, have to think about, and respect our existing mandates across the federal space, and including the Global Change Research Act, which guides the U.S. Global Change Research Program and mandates certain products and services, such as the National Climate Assessment. But again, I think through this whole of government effort that you're seeing underway in the White House through the National Climate Task Force, and also through these interagency programs that I described, I think we're making some good progress.
Another question, which you sort of touched on, is the shift from mitigation to adaptation an admission that we won't reach ambitious carbon reduction goals?
Well, let me just say that I stay away from any policy considerations. So I want to stay with the science. And I think there is a recognition that we need both, and we need more of both. So I'll just leave it there. I mean, we could dive into adaptation or mitigation, but no, I'm not suggesting in any way that increasing emphasis on adaptation means that we don't need to continue to also increase emphasis on mitigation.
Are there programs or opportunities within NOAA for staff to work with teams of young people to take practical STEM-based action on climate change?
Absolutely. There are many, many of them. And in fact, I couldn't possibly, give you the whole list here live in this setting. But there are one of the things that we're working very hard on doing is improving the access to, historically underserved universities through a number of our hiring authorities. We're also trying to push the needs for interdisciplinarity, which starts, of course, with academia. And through these hiring authorities, we really are trying to accelerate, the infusion of young people into the agency. I can speak for my office in saying that there's definitely a trend there. And aside from the interdisciplinarity, I think one thing that we have learned is that we are not where I'd like to see us be with respect to diversity. And so, in addition to those hiring authorities, thinking about the ways that we hire people, how we assemble panels, what kinds of questions we ask, how we invite applicants to apply. All of those things need to continue to be revisited in order to improve that pipeline.
And on a similar topic, what advice would you give the younger generation of current college undergraduates interested in working towards climate resiliency and sustainability?
I have always been and will always be a champion for our student interns. Just as an example, when I was in the Weather Service, one summer I had 10 summer interns working on summer projects. So I know and understand the value and actually have experienced it personally. I came to NOAA as an intern, and I also was an intern at NASA. So I know the value and importance of these experiences to undergraduates and graduate students in not only steering them forward towards their ambitions, but actually also building that pipeline, for NOAA and other agencies. I'll call out one program, the Bill LaPenta internship program, which originated in the National Weather Service, but then was expanded to OAR and is now across all of OAR's labs and programs, is one shining example where undergraduates, have been coming in droves to the various opportunities we have in our offices, programs, and labs. And I don't have the exact figures, but something like a quarter of those interns have gone on now to be NOAA employees.
In terms of climate education and awareness, how would you prioritize and place needs for outreach, NOAA scientists providing climate information to the public, versus in-reach, educating the NOAA workforce and integrating climate science into all we do?
Well, my gosh, both are so important. I'm going to just give you this perspective as a microcosm from my office, where we have a whole division focused on communication, education, and engagement. And through tools like climate.gov, where we try to reach different audiences like the climate interested public, as well as educators, and through tools like the Climate Resilience Toolkit, where we're trying to work with stakeholders to help them protect their valued assets through the steps to resilience. I place the need to engage our stakeholders in education and communication very, very highly in my organization. And as far as across my office, actually, as well as across NOAA, let me just give you the example of climate services. In NOAA today, we have something north of 100 programs, offices, and labs that are doing some form of climate products and services for stakeholders. There's, I think, a lot of room for better coordination of all of those activities so that when stakeholders come to NOAA, there's kind of no wrong door approach. In other words, they get the authoritative information they need, and they don't have to worry about how NOAA is organized internally or getting that information to them. They get what they need, and it helps them make their decisions. I think we have a lot of room for, first of all, understanding collectively what we do across NOAA, inside NOAA, and then better coordinating what we do to make sure we're meeting the needs of those stakeholders. And I will say, I think the Climate Ready Nation effort and the vision for a climate ready nation by 2030 is a really great opportunity for NOAA to do both. And I'll just emphasize, and in particular, perhaps organize a bit better across the agency to make sure that the authoritative climate products and services we provide are meeting stakeholder needs and that they are authoritative.
Sort of in line with that, we have a question on what can be done within NOAA to ensure collaboration between line offices in support of the activities and goals you've described.
Many, many things. Among them, fora like this, where we have NOAA-wide conversations. But getting to some specifics, I'm very proud of the agency's efforts to establish, say, a NOAA Climate Council for that kind of strategic perspective on climate-related issues and science, and then a Weather, Water, and Climate Board sitting under the NOAA Climate Council, which does the execution across line offices on cross-line office initiatives such as those I mentioned, like the Coastal Inundation at Climate Timescales, which obviously involves at least the National Ocean Service and OAR, or the Precipitation Prediction Grand Challenge under the board, which also involves several line offices, National Weather Service, NESDIS, and OAR, etc. So I think we're doing a good job on getting, moving down the path of better coordination across the lines. But I think communication is key. And fora like this one, I think, are great for that kind of communication.
We have a question here about whether you can comment on the Climate and Fisheries Initiative funding and implementation pathways.
I don't want to get too much into the detail on funding, but let me just say that there is an executive steering committee made up of 5 members from OAR, National Marine Fisheries Service, and the National Ocean Service that have been working very hard on the governance, the timeline, and the budget to move us towards the goals of the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative. I think we're making good progress there. I'm hopeful that we'll, right now, to be honest, we need more funding than we currently have, and we're hopeful that in FY23 we'll realize some of that additional funding so that we can establish the national teams that we need, that we can implement the regional modeling for those national teams. Regional teams, and this includes, by the way, additional computing resources which are needed to run those the regional ocean models for those regional teams, and so on. So I think we're making good progress. We've got a good governance model that's nearly final. We've got a good understanding of when the Climate Ecosystems and Fisheries Initiative can be fully mature. And now the hope, of course, is that we realize the support that we need to make that a reality.
You've mentioned stakeholder needs. What are some of the emerging stakeholder needs in terms of advancing research to operations initiatives?
Well, there's so many and varied, and obviously it depends on the hazard. So for example, let's take extreme heat. One of the things we're doing in the Climate Program Office is urban heat island field campaigns. We're doing them in major cities around the country. Part of the purpose for this is working with municipal planners so that they understand, first of all, where the extreme heat occurs in their particular location and how they can position assets such as cooling shelters for folks that are at risk to extreme heat. That's just one example. You could take any of the societal challenge areas and you could go to multiple types of stakeholder needs, again, across coastal resilience issues, climate projections and how they're used by different stakeholder communities, such as, I'll just give you one, the American Society of Civil Engineers, who are designing, building standards, 100 years into the future, and who need good climate projection information that NOAA can provide. So how do we work effectively with that group? And, you can extend this to insurance, et cetera.
Another area of engagement we have a question about is what engagement NOAA has in climate efforts with Department of Defense and Department of Navy outside of ICAMS.
That's an area where I'm not well educated to comment very deeply. In the U.S. Global Change Research Program, I do work directly with Department of Defense as one of the 13 agencies on global change research issues. Within NOAA, I'm not directly involved in many Department of Defense initiatives, so I would rather not comment further.
Understandable, and this will be our final question. How are field staff made aware of opportunities for engagement in various working groups or new job opportunities, and how can people get involved with the items that you've described?
Communication is key. So for example, as the National Climate Task Force interagency working groups continue to mature and deliver and expand their roles, I think it's incumbent on leaders to communicate what they're doing and where their gaps are, and where we have needs for additional subject matter expertise, including in the field. So that certainly is one. For like this, again, I just want to really highlight, how important this is to me to be able to talk to a broad audience about, what we're doing and how important we think it is, and getting feedback through communication and education and engagement. And again, I'll go back to the division in the Climate Program Office that's focused on those issues is again another way for field folks to understand where the priorities are and where the agency is going.
I think we'll be transferring back to Allie now. There she is.
Awesome. Yeah. Thank you very much. Dr. Higgins, do you have any closing words or comments?
I just want to thank everyone again for the opportunity to give you this update on NOAA's role in the whole of climate effort that's going on across the federal government. I also want to thank Hernan's team for making this such a pleasant and wonderful experience for me personally, and for the opportunity to deliver these remarks. And Allie, I want to also thank you and wish you luck in your career.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Higgins, for that and for a very terrific talk. It was extremely informative. And thank you, Grace, for moderating the questions. And on that note, our next NOAA Environmental Leadership Seminar will be on July 19th by Dr. John Cortinas. He's the director of NOAA's Atlantic Oceanographic and Meteorological Laboratory. And with that, we thank everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you.